Claudia Diaz is going to talk. She is assistant professor at KU Kevin. Her research focuses on the modeling, design, and analysis of privacy-enhancing technology, and she is kick-ass, so you guys are in for a treat.
Oh my god. So, I think I'm developing some sort of cold or flu. We had a big party yesterday, so the biological infrastructure is not in the best conditions. I'm trying to do my best. So thanks for the introduction and for the invitation. You have a lovely room and place here, and I'm looking forward to talking to people afterwards. Okay, so my talk has two parts. In the first part, I will try to give like a bird's eye level overview of how we can think about privacy technologies in the sense of different contexts in which it makes sense to talk about privacy and technology. And then I will talk more in detail about one of our works in which we looked into obfuscation-based private web search, meaning a set of techniques in order to obfuscate the way that you search things online and therefore get some protection. And we did some analysis of existing tools. Okay, so first of all, to start, so this is work, I think many of you know Seda. So we have been, she has been working on this already for a long time, and I joined her, and it's research that tries to somehow put some conceptual order in when we talk about privacy and technology, what are we talking about? And there are many different ways of thinking about it, and one way is to think about the types of problems that are addressed by the different technologies. So one, and I guess everybody's very familiar with news stories in which the privacy problems that are brought up are related to my parents found I was gay, or I said something about my boss, and then in Facebook, and then the boss saw it, and I lost my job, things like that. So this is what we can call social privacy, in the sense that it relates to problems that you have in your immediate social environment that are caused in a way by the mediation of technology in your social interaction. So while before you would have like a conversation in a room, now maybe you're having this conversation through a chat room, which is some technology that's mediating. Since we are still sort of adapting and learning like how these technologies work and how they change the way we communicate with each other, we might encounter problems with our peers. You know? So a lot of these social privacy issues relate to self-presentation, identity construction, especially in social network platforms, social media, in which people sort of construct their identity to interact with others. There's a lot of research in this area that looks into decision making. So how can we help people make better decisions when they use online technologies? So for example, how do they decide what they want to share, with whom, when, how they select the audiences, and so on. And then there's also research on usability. So in the first part is how do you help people make decisions so that they do not somehow regret things they might have done, or that they do not do something that they are not happy with. And second is, how do we make sure that the technology behaves in a way that the users understand it, that they can expect what the outcome is going to be. So when they share something with a set of people, that is the people they have in mind that are actually going to have access to that information and not someone else. So example solutions that are coming sort of from the privacy research field include, for example, contextual feedback mechanisms. One example would be that when you are going to post something, maybe you can be reminded of the audience in a way that is very visible next to the text that you're writing, so that you do not forget who your audience is. Of course, usability of privacy settings, and there are many ways in which we can improve the way that the privacy settings usability. One way of doing it is automating the configuration of settings. So for example, I could have an algorithm that looks into my social network and looks into the sort of clusters of friends that I have, and from that it identifies different contexts in which I interact, and this can be used to suggest groups that instead of me having to like create these groups like from scratch, adding people one by one, so that would make it easier. And then there's, coming from behavioral economics, all this research on privacy nudges and nudging, and basically the idea here is that people have like cognitive biases, and therefore we can design the technology in a way that we use these biases to nudge people or to push people into being more privacy preserving. And there are many ideas. One very nice idea is this timer. So this is a plugin for using with Facebook that when you wrote your post, you push the publish button, and it's not immediately published. Instead, you get a countdown that says, okay, your post is going to be published in 10 seconds, 9, 8, and then this gives you like a moment of reflection of whether this is something that you really want to post, or maybe you want to edit it, or maybe you want to cancel it. Or in other cases, you might be completely sure, and then you just wait the 10 seconds, and then it will be published. So some of the limitations of, I mean, of course, when we approach privacy in a certain way, there are many things we are leaving out. Right? So some of the limitations of the solutions that focus on social privacy include, for example, that there's a lot of emphasis on user-generated content, because, of course, we are talking about interaction with your peers, so it's very much about what you share and not so much about metadata that is maybe not so visible to the user and to the other peers, but is visible still to the system. There is, of course, a focus on the front end, on the user interface, rather than how the back-end systems are designed. With the methodology, the research methodology in this kind of work is very much based on user studies, and of course all the issues of how do you select your users and which population do you want to represent. Very often they try to focus on what they call the average consumer, but that means that who is this average consumer and to what extent is it representative of the different groups of people that might be using the technology. And then they focus on privacy expectations in the sense of making sure the technology behaves as people expect. That's really nice. But on the other hand, if we frame privacy as something that is about expectations, then if the expectations erode, then we have less and less reasons for being privacy preserving. Okay, so this is one way of looking at privacy and technology. A different way is what we can call institutional privacy, and here is not so much about people socially relating to each other, but people relating to institutions and organizations that offer them services and that, as a result, collect data about them and process data about them. So, in this case, privacy is very much framed as being compliant with existing regulations. This is data protection in the European Union and fair information practices here in the US. So what does it mean to protect privacy from this perspective is, okay, you have to inform consumers or citizens or patients or whoever the people that are, whose data is concerned, you have to inform them of how you're collecting data, what you're doing with it, the purposes for which you collect it, and so on. If you have a database with personal data, you have obligations. You need to ensure that the data is kept confidential, that it is correct, that people have the opportunity to maybe correct any mistakes that might be in the data. You need to specify the purpose for which you're collecting the data and then make sure that you're using it for those purposes and not for secondary purposes that were not specified at the moment of collection. And you might have auditability requirements that means that it is possible to see how the data has been used by looking into how the employees in the organization have been accessing it and so on. So some of the solutions in this space try to focus on the sort of the notice and choice, meaning we all know that privacy policies are long and difficult to find and difficult to understand and so on. So can we make it easier for people to understand what they are agreeing to? So P3P, which is also already like an old technology, is a way to automate in the sense that you can specify which purposes and which pieces of data you're willing to share with an organization, with a website in this case. And then what the technology does is that you have your preferences expressed, the website has their practices expressed in a similar policy, and then there is some automated matching of these two policies that tells you, okay, this website is doing something that you have indicated that you would not be happy with. What do you want to do? Do you still want to visit the website, or do you want to do something else? And then do not track is a similar mechanism, much simpler for telling websites you don't want to be tracked. It's unclear what that, and the discussions are ongoing. It's unclear this is going anywhere, but I wanted to include it anyway. So As I said, purpose limitation is, particularly in data protection in Europe, is seen as a key property of protecting privacy when organizations are dealing with data. They have to very clearly specify the purpose and then make sure that they are not using data for other purposes. And of course, we can have technologies that help organizations realize this. So, for example, in purpose-based access control, here the access to the data that employees or people working in an organization get to personal data is not only based on who they are, but is also based on for which purpose they are accessing the information. So we would have to specify for the purpose of an access, and then the system might deny this access if this is incompatible with the purposes for which the information has been collected. And then audit systems. And audit systems are interesting because, of course, they require somehow deploying a surveillance infrastructure within organizations, in the sense that in order to be able to see whether somebody has abused, then you need to log everything they have been doing with the data, which might make issues like employee privacy come up. So some of the limitations of this technology is the trust model, in the sense that organizations are really by default, by the way this is defined, they are trusted with your information, and then it's really about protecting the data from other entities, such as third parties, hackers who might break into your database, or also the employees within the organization. That it's not really saying anything or giving you any protections towards organizations that are malicious and really want to abuse your data in any way. It really focuses mostly on data use rather than limiting data protection. So there's lots of emphasis on purpose rather than on saying, okay, maybe we can reduce the amount of data that is exposed and collected. And then there is a very strong focus on personal data. And personal data in data protection is defined in a way that is difficult to understand what actually is in and out, because it's data that refers to an identified or an identifiable person. So what is an identifiable person? We know, we have more and more evidence with research coming up that it is easy to identify people by putting together pieces of data seemingly innocent, that by themselves you would not think that they are identified, but of course when you combine them, they become a fingerprint of the person and enable identification. Okay, so this was the second perspective. And the third and last perspective is what we can call more I call it the PETs, privacy enhancing technologies, which are really taking a conception of privacy that is very much related to counter-surveillance. Right? So it's really protecting people towards the entities that operate the infrastructure, or entities that have access to the infrastructure in some way. So in this case, what we want to achieve is either making communications confidential, so this would be like classical encryption algorithms, but not only that, in some of the cases you might want to make the content of the communication public, but the identity of the person communicating concealed. And one example would be that you want to publish some anonymous speech in some blog. You want the text to be available to the world, but you don't want the fact that you wrote it to be known. There are many other pieces of information that we might want to conceal. Location is also a field of location privacy emerging, where the idea is how can we use location-based services and take advantage of the nice services that we can have that use location as one of the data items. So, for example, to tell you how to help you find points of interest around you and so on, and enrich your environment in some way, but without giving your location towards the entity or the service provider. Usage patterns, or even concealing an activity. Maybe I don't want the service provider to know whether I am even communicating or not, or using the system or not. It's mostly about confidentiality of data, or identities, or relationships, but also, these technologies also target often availability properties, in the sense that, for example, specifically with anonymous communications, it's not only about enabling you to anonymously browse the internet or anonymously communicate with others, but it's also aimed at preventing whoever is operating the infrastructure from preventing you from communicating to certain recipients of censorship resistance properties. And systems like Tor really target both goals at the same time. solutions. Yeah, there is also, I already talked about encryption and anonymous communications. There's a big field of advanced crypto protocols that do really counterintuitive things, like allowing you to download information from a database without the database knowing which information they're downloading. You are able to search and encrypted data. You are able to authenticate while remaining anonymous, in the sense that you might be able to prove, for example, that you're a member of this club, but you're not giving away specifically which person you are. And the last item I'm mentioning here is the one I want to elaborate on in the rest of the presentation, which is obfuscation approaches. And here the idea is that instead of using cryptography or concealment of information, what we do is like we generate fake information in order to introduce noise in the system. And this can also be seen as a privacy strategy, as a preserving strategy. Some of the limitations of this approach, one of the limitations is that you need to really be very precise in what you mean when you are saying that a system protects privacy, and this usually means giving sort of a mathematical definition of what it means for a system to be privacy preserving. Because then you need to prove through the security analysis that the definition is met, given an adversary model and so on. But of course this is a bit reducing and taking out the nuances of privacy. It's more than just is this bit disclosed or not. Okay, so the second part, I don't know how much time it consumed, I think I should go fast. It's about obfuscation-based private web search. So here, this is based on a paper that we published a couple of years ago. So the idea of these systems is, okay, search logs can be very revealing of your interest, of who you are, of what makes you tick, of what you're interested in. So we want to somehow conceal or prevent the profiling that can be derived from analyzing these search logs. So here, who are we trying to protect against? The search engine itself, so Google or whoever, Bing or whatever search engine, or any other party has access to the search logs. And the strategy that we follow to do this is not to encrypt the information or to do like encrypted search or anything like that. It's actually to generate additional queries that are automatically generated. Because they are automatically generated and not by you, they are not necessarily related to your interest, and they somehow pollute the search logs that the search engine is keeping. So what we did in this work was to analyze 6 tools that have been proposed in prior literature that use these strategies, and we saw that they did not really achieve what they promised, and in part was because they considered sort of a naive strategy, naive adversary rather than a strategic adversary. So just to give you an idea of how these systems work, so we have the user, okay, then this is the entity we want to protect. This user is sending some search queries to the search engine, and these queries we can see them as individual queries, but they might also be mapping to certain categories. So for example, is this a query about sports or about health or about other categories of interest? So we can think of what we call SCA, semantic classification algorithm, is an algorithm that would somehow map the search keywords themselves to some sort of category of interest, because in the end the search engine is going to operate on the basis of these categories when, for example, deciding whether to serve you certain ads or deciding what is interesting for you. So this is the user. Then we have the tool, which is typically developed as a browser plugin in most cases. The main thing that this tool does is generate dummy queries, so it has to have some strategy encoded in the tool to decide when to generate a query, how to select the keywords that go in these fake queries, so it has to be a whole strategy, where do you get these keywords from, and so on and so on. And then basically what comes out of the computer of the user is going to be a mix of the queries that the user herself generated and the queries that were generated by the tool. Okay? And this is sent over the internet to the search engine that is considered adversarial. So we can consider a naive adversary that just receives all these queries and says, okay, well, I'm going to just take all these queries and take them as real and believe that this is what the user is searching for. So if the adversary does that, then we get some profile that we call the observed profile, and basically this is the profile that is noisy because it contains part of it is user related and part of it is tool related. But of course, if we want to do a more security approach to designing and analyzing these systems, then we need to consider strategic adversary. And the difference here is that the strategic adversary is aware of the fact that this tool might be in place, knows how the strategy used by the tool, so what is the damage generation strategy, how this tool is selecting keywords, how it is trying to introduce noise, and this strategic adversary tries to remove the noise, right? So it might try to distinguish real queries from fake queries based on the syntax of the query or based on the topics of the query. And it can operate both at the query level, meaning that you look at queries individually to try to make a decision, or at the profile level, if I know that the tool is trying to make it look like everyone is interested in sports, then I might say, okay, well, I got this observer profile, but I will now decrease the weight of the sports category because I know the tool has been increasing it artificially. So we need to do these two types of analysis. From a query-based level, what the property that we might want to achieve is query distinguishability or plausible deniability, meaning that even a query is not possible to tell whether it is real or generated by the user or generated by the tool. And plausible deniability in this context would be that if you are confronted with a query, you are able to plausibly claim that the tool generated it and not you in case that query is compromising in any way. One of the big issues here is that it's very difficult to imitate the user in the sense that creating queries that are indistinguishable is already a hard problem. But if you take into account sequences of queries that might be related topic-wise to each other, then it becomes even more difficult. Because what happens if you are trying to find certain information, and then you would try one query, and then you would refine your search and try something else? There will be some sort of logic to the sequence. While how do you make a tool that somehow fakes this logic, not on a one-by-one basis, but on a sequence basis? That's actually very difficult. And from a profile perspective, the property that we want is profile obfuscation, meaning that given the observed profile, this is the profile Y, which contains the fake and real queries all together. We do not want it to be possible to somehow reverse, take out the noise, and get back to something filtered that is very close to the profile that one would obtain without the noise. Okay. And here, one of the problems we found with some of the tools that tried to achieve this is that they worked in a very predictable manner. And the predictability was basically that they were trying to do it so well, they were trying to say, okay, if this is my profile and I represent it in this way, like a vector in a space, I am going to try to present a profile that is as different as possible from the one I have, my real profile, right? So let's maximize the distance between the two vectors. Now the problem is that when you're trying to maximize distance, then you're going to take a predictable route. If I know that if I have an observation of a point and I know that to get there something was taken through the shortest path, then I can somehow reverse that and take out the noise, or at least part of the noise. So one of the things is that many of these papers, many of these tools, the metric that they used to show that the tool was working was dissimilarity between the real profile, which is the one that you would obtain only with the queries made by the user, and the observed profile, which is the one that contains the noise. The more different they are, the better the tool is working. Now, the problem with that, although it's very intuitive, is that it doesn't take into account that maybe as adversary, once I know how the system is working, I might be able to reverse. So what we proposed is that a better metric was, okay, how much information is leaked about the real profile given the observation, and taking into account that I might be able to remove the noise. Now, these two levels are actually not independent, so that complicates things even more and makes it harder to actually design systems that are effective and that offer a very well understood level of security, in the sense that if I am able to distinguish queries, even if it's not perfect, but probabilistically, that will allow me to recover better profiles, and if the profiles are predictable, for example, in the way they are modified, that might help me distinguish individual queries. So just to go to the simple example, if I know that this tool is such that it tries to make the profile of a person that is interested in sports, then that would not only allow me to somehow lower that category in the profile that I obtain, but also say, okay, this query is about sport, is possibly a fake query, while this other query is about another topic is very likely to be a real query. So, another thing that is interesting about this system is that the challenges that we find are actually challenges that we find in other systems as well. So if we think about anonymous communications, we have this same type of problem. You can think about anonymous communications as, I want to protect the fact that right now, today, in this instance, I'm browsing to this page, and this is all I care about. Or you can be more concerned about long-term profiling in the sense that I don't want anybody to be able to construct like a profile of what is my typical browser behavior, right? And we would have, again, the same challenge that if you have a vulnerability that allows you to look into individual queries and distinguish them, then that gives away the long-term profile and the other way around. And the same is, happens with, for example, location system. That is, what are you concerned about? Are you concerned about specific instances, that a person is in a certain location at a certain point in time, or are you concerned about protecting long-term mobility patterns? Right? So this is not only this system that has these issues. So some challenges that we find to protect, to design systems for private web search based on obfuscation is that to an extent we need to be able to, in order to design a tool that is effective, we need to be able to predict to a large extent the strategy of the adversary. So, first of all, we do not have, if we look here, we do not have access typically to the algorithm, the semantic classification algorithm that the adversary is using to map queries to categories, right? So if we do not have access to that, it's very difficult to design the tool in a way that that is going to be effective. And I give you an example. Imagine, so one of the tools was trying to deal with this issue that you have, assuming that you have some persistent interests, that in time you go back to making very similar queries. So one of the systems was generating for each query that you send, it was sending k-1 other queries. Okay, let's say it sends 3 other queries that are not together with yours, the real one. Okay, that's very nice. And it was actually even accounting for this problem by saying, okay, every time you send a query that is related to children, I'm going to add a query that is related to physics, and a query that is related to history, and a query that is related to sports. And these categories are sort of fixed, and I will choose the accompanying queries in that way, so that by looking at a series, I will see a series of sports queries and a series of history queries, and I cannot just use that distinguisher to tell apart one from the other. Now, of course, for that, in order to be able to succeed in that, I need to be able to know how the queries are mapped into categories, because it could be that I think the adversary is using the category kids and physics and history, and that this is the mapping they would do. If they do a different mapping, then the patterns are disrupted, and then suddenly your real pattern will appear when the others will not. So one of the examples that we had an event on obfuscation last Saturday, and one of the examples that was brought up is this radar chaff that was used in World War II in order to make it difficult to localize planes by the radar. So basically you throw these papers that are cut to the wavelength of the radar, and basically the radar will see planes appearing all over the place, and they will not be able to see like which is the real position of the plane in order to shoot it down. Right? Now, if you do not know what is the wavelength of the radar, then you are not able to design the countermeasure. So this thing happens. Yeah, other challenges are really practical in the sense that, okay, we are able to conceal the queries, but then you will click some links, and then how do you would need, this acts as a side channel effectively. And yeah, essentially, you cannot look at the pieces of the problem so much in isolation, because they are part of a bigger system that might give away what you're trying to conceal. And the big question is, do you want these tools to be observable or to be signaled? To be unobservable or signaled? So if you signal the existence of the tool, then you might be punished by the service provider. It's like, okay, you're a bad user, you're wasting my resources, I will not give you I will cut you off, or I will give you, I will put you in the lowest priority and you will take more time to get your results, and so on. But if we make it unobservable, then, well, first of all, if we want to make it unobservable, then we need to prove that it's indeed unobservable and it's not possible to detect the tool. Now, it's not only that, it's also that if we make a tool that is unobservable, then are we really solving the problem of profiling, in the sense that this is like as if the adversary was behaving as naive instead of strategic, right? And the problem here is that it's not only that they learn who you are, assuming that that these profiling algorithms really work and really get an insight into who you are. That's not only the problem. The problem is that they are making decisions based on those profiles. Right? And now they will have a profile that is maybe not matching you so well, but they will still be making decisions based on that information. Now, if you do not know how you're modifying your profile, you might be subject to decisions that are in the end worse for you than the ones that will be made based on your real profile. So maybe you're getting now a more expensive price because of the modifications. So this is an issue that is very difficult to counter, and basically if not enough people use the tool, I think it is reasonable to believe that this would probably be happening. Because if they do not care to be wrong for like 1 in a million people, you will still be subject to decisions and you will not be disrupting the profiling practice enough. And then related to this, do you include sensitive queries or not? Do you include queries about whatever health issues or bomb making or anything that would be considered like sensitive? If you do not, if you say, okay, I do not want to include these queries, then anytime this query is sent out, it's clear that it's real, and therefore you do not have deniability for that query, and it becomes distinguishable. Now, if you say, yes, let's include those queries so that when somebody makes them for real, they still have deniability, then what happens if this is considered as real by the search engine and you are subject to consequences based on decisions made on the basis of those queries? So what are we able to achieve in systems like this, assuming that we will be able to make a technology that will work perfectly? Query deniability, that's something that we can achieve relatively easily. If many people would use the tool, then this would be really nice in the sense that we would be able to degrade the effectiveness of profiling and somehow disrupt the practice in a way that is stopped or that is rethought, because right now we have very little way of countering these profiling practices and these decisions. But this is only if many people use the tool, which is, of course, with privacy tools, it's very difficult to get a large user base. If not many people use the tool, then okay, maybe you can have a sense of satisfaction of saying, okay, you think you know who I am, but actually you don't. And you can still achieve something in the sense that if, for example, the information that I learn by observing you is something that I then use to manipulate you, because I know that if I put the picture of a kitten, then you will buy whatever is next to it. Now this will not work because I will be putting the picture of an elephant instead of a kitten, just to illustrate. And one thing to keep in mind is that even if we are generating all these junk queries and sending them to the search engine, our real queries are still there. So things, for example, like the America Online case that many of you might remember, in which people there was this anonymous search logs published for research purposes, and then some of the people who were anonymous users in that log were re-identified. So in this case, this will not prevent it, because if what gives you away is like some subset of queries, they will still be there. Even if the junk is added, identification will not be prevented. So these are sort of more modest goals than, except, well, if many people use the tool, then we sort of achieve what we wanted, but that's unclear, we will get there. And other ways in which we can design tools that maybe have more effectiveness is, well, ideally we would want to know how the profiling algorithm works, so that you do not sort of randomly change your profile, but you actually present the persona that you want to present to the search engine for your own purposes. But without access to the logic that is running in the backend, this is very difficult. Or we could use it as a tool for solidarity in the sense that instead of trying to generate queries all over the place and just introduce random noise, we can maybe say, okay, we are all going to look for cancer queries, and therefore when somebody's for real looking for cancer queries, then it looks like it's a fake, and therefore they will not be profiled and they will not be discriminated against for doing that. This is a bit similar to people, I remember some years ago, people used to put footers in their emails saying like bomb, terrorist, all these things to just make lots of false positives in the filters that were analyzing emails. And I mean, of course, another approach is to not only rely on obfuscation, but to combine it with anonymity. That would help us achieve a lot more. So that's my last slide. I don't know if I want much more time.
Can you take questions?
Sure.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions? DK? Yeah.
Thanks for your talk. I'm curious about the relationship between the obfuscated web search and projects like Google sharing. So I don't know if you're familiar with Google sharing. It's basically a proxy service where users subscribe to the proxy service and submit their queries to the proxy, and then the proxy mixes the queries together and actually submits them to Google. So that rather than finding it like a generic algorithmic profile, instead you're actually just having your queries mixed together with other actual queries from actual users.
Yeah. So I'm not really familiar with the project, but from what you're saying, it seems that the proxy is a trusted party. So basically you're introducing an entity now that has access to the real queries of these users that are actually privacy concerned, and therefore might even have more sensitive queries to make. So to me that would be a concern, to introduce this trusted party in the system. I don't know to what extent users might be able to learn about each other by seeing, it depends on the design, but you might also be introducing the problem that is now not only the search engine that can get access to these queries in these profiles, but now maybe other people can do it as well. Yeah. And then you need diversity as well. If the people who are using the service are all similar to each other, then you will not be achieving much in terms of modifying your profile. So yeah, it's difficult to have a solution that is really effective.
What were the tools that you analyzed?
So Track Me Not is the one that is out there and more in use. The others were more theoretical designs. One was called Goopy, the other was Plausible Deniable Search. Another one didn't have a name, we call it QFP, which was like query forgery for private information retrieval, I think. And another one was called PROW, which is, there are a series of papers describing it.
Have you heard of Case Stack? Like Case Study C, that's another one.
Sorry?
Case Study C, it's another one.
Okay, that, yeah. Is it new, or?
It's actually old, but it hasn't been maintained very well.
Okay, so yeah, that we were not aware of it. Yeah, it would have been nice to, do you know if the strategy that it uses?
The end goal is basically just to like, it didn't let you, like it wasn't really aimed at creating like the opposite profile. It was just more of like, let's bring in as much noise as possible, but it did so that the context of the searches would also be time sensitive. So basically have like, okay, here's like, in this case it was like Google Hot Trends, which is not a very good source because it's Google. But it basically say like, we know like how to divvy up the content from the site based on date, just like a blog, like month by month or whatever. So let's take content from different points in time so that it can be flagged by like something that would make more sense in specific context. Like if you were looking for like 2008 primaries, and then everything else was from like 1995 or something, then that would be kind of stand out. But if you had a multitude of different historical contexts, and it would basically have this whole concept that way too.
Okay, but then the sources for generating the fake queries were known, public.
Yeah, the idea was to like basically have a bunch of sources, and then basically have it so that you don't just have like, so the source would be a web page, with a lot of historical content. So it wouldn't just be like one page, but just like here's a WordPress blog, and here's the months that it in its existence set it's had content. And it would basically do a lot of randomization to like kind of like grab stuff from here and grab stuff from there and mix it up.
So that's one of the challenges I don't think I mentioned, which is like, where do you get like these sources? If the sources are publicly available and are available to the adversary, and they are like the same for all users and sort of predictable, anything that is not in those blogs, then you know it's a real query. So that also helps you with distinguishability.
Right. It's the other like in-goal architecture was basically just to like have as many blogs possible available, so you have like, you know, a sort of like known archive for like say 200 blogs or so, but like within any search source you would only have like 5 of those randomly chosen and accessed. So the probability of that kind of that it was from one of them increases so that you end up covering more of the language basically.
Yeah. So. Nice.
Did any of the tools that you looked at focus rather than on query indistinguishability, actually generating profile indistinguishability?
Yes, 2 of them. So 2 of them, this Pro and QFPeer. So in QFPeer, the idea was that they had like this average profile, which was like the average user in the world somehow, whatever, assuming that that exists, right? And then what they would try to do is to push everyone to look like this user, right? Now, the problem is, first of all, that it's like, okay, privacy is a problem when you're deviating from the average only, which is a little bit of a strange conception, I think. And the other is that, of course, because it was predictable, because this point was known, and you're trying to, basically, in a space, you're trying to reach a point, if I know the direction you're coming from, and I know more or less the magnitude of how much you have traveled, then I can reverse. And the other one was dissimilarity, maximizing the cosine, so minimizing the cosine similarity between your real profile and your search profile. And again, it was predictable. So that was the problem with both. Predictability was the problem with both approaches.
And is that the same as pretending, for instance, I'm sending a real tool, real queries, and it's sending, you know, 17-year-old female queries, it's sending 48-year-old male queries, it's sending business person in New York queries? Like, is that the same idea as in, rather than trying to make me similar to the average, it says there are 10 people at this IP address, they look real, even over a year of time, it looks like a 17-year-old female, a 48-year-old male. That's what I'm wondering.
Yeah, that's a different approach. So you mean like having like schizophrenic multiple personalities. Now, the problem is, first of all, it would be possible for the search engine to determine, unless you take special precautions, which is not at all easy, but it would be possible to map everything to the same computer. So then it would have to be, I mean, especially since computers tend to be more and more personal, thinking that 10 people are going to share one computer is already a case that looks a bit fishy, I think, from the search engine perspective. The other is that, what would you do? Imagine, I mean, would you interleave all these personalities at the same time? Obviously, that's not believable. The 10 people are sort of sharing the keyword at the same time. So basically, your real queries will always, you know, you would be stopping the user, saying, no, you cannot search now because we are pretending that now it's a 17-year-old. So what you're looking for is not fitting that kind of profile, so that would be an issue too. You would have to, if you wanted to do that, then maybe you would simulate, how do you deal with time? Do you deal with time like this hour is this user and this other hour is this other user? You see what I mean? Like,
yeah, no, I don't know how these tools accomplish the same, the tools you discussed. Would they send 6 queries and dump 5 responses to the queries and only show the user?
Yes, so those were the query-based systems. What they did was multiply. So it was a sort of a k-anonymity type of approach, in which every time I sent a search, the system would generate another 3 or 4, whatever parameter k queries that would be sent along with mine. And then it would filter the responses from the others and only show to the user the one that corresponds to his actual search. Now the problem you have there is these sequences. What if I am looking for something and I have sequences of searches that sort of make sense because I'm, for example, narrowing down what I'm looking for or looking for related topics, and it's very difficult to generate a tool that automatically will make sense in the same way as a human.
I have a sort of along similar lines. I may have misunderstood something in the threat model and the way you were saying this works, but part of the threat to me looks like it's actually that not just that we have search engines where you can make profiles, but that Google actually connects your search profile to your actual profile where you contribute data, right? And that's the case with most search engines, and that seems much harder to overcome, especially if the attack model we're talking about is somebody going to Google knocking on the door and saying, hey Google, give me all your stuffs. You know, so I'm sort of wondering, you know, are you just figuring out users who only search, or what is it that we're...
Yeah, so the tools, I mean, we didn't design, we analyzed the tools, we didn't design them, but that's also, that's one of the problems, which is the side channels, right?
Yeah.
In the sense that, what about the clicks that come after the searchers, what about,
Yeah.
that typically these tools, they did not consider that. They were really looking at search in isolation.
Yeah.
Because of course, to come up with a solution, you need to simplify the problem to some extent.
Yeah.
But then you
have a very simple solution.
You have a very simple solution, but even the solution was not simple, and none of the tools really worked very well, even with those simplifications. So yeah. But of course, in a real deployment, if you want to really be effective, you would not need to take into account these other issues. Yeah.
It seems like the quickest way to detect a tool would be to see if the user loaded images on the page, click the link, and move the maps. Did any of the tools consider any potential side channels? No.
That was, another problem. But the thing is, I mean, I fully agree that these are things that need to be taken into consideration when you're developing a tool that is going to be deployed. But to me, the problem with these systems is that even if you would make abstraction of more practical issues, it is very difficult to design them in a way that even theoretically would be robust, which is a bit, it's not a very good result in that respect.
Do you consider something like Tor browser bundle within the same tool space that functions as the same type of obfuscation tool, and did you compare it or think about it? So
I think that Tor is in this sense more effective as a privacy tool for search engines, in the sense that what it does is that it makes unlinkable pieces of your search. So when you have a session, you might have a set of queries that are sent over the same circuit, and therefore they can be linked together. But over the long term, you would be chopping it up, and you would not be able to link together these different sessions. So I think that's more effective. I think it might be interesting to think about what if you combine the both, right? What if you have anonymous channels and you're also adding junk to this? Then what do you achieve? But then it becomes very difficult to also formalize and analyze and have a result that says, okay, this is, these are the parameters that you need to use, or you're adding a lot of complexity as well.
I'm actually going to encourage you guys to talk to Claudia now so that people can move around, because we've been sitting for an hour. Can we get a round of applause for this lady?